Sonic the Hedgehog has a lot of creepypastas, like an incalculable amount. He's become his own subgenre within the larger expanse of general horror content on the internet. He's dapping up Slender Man at this point. Whether it's the original sonic.exe classic, or a fan-created alternate version with its own massive lore and continuity, everyone has their own favorite story, fan game, or personal project. I've been pretty critical of a lot of these stories and games for being incredibly repetitive and stale, but every so often we get a more cerebral and thought-provoking project like Green Mountain, which takes the Sonic universe to tell a still unraveling tale of murder and deception with some striking visuals and audio that puts it at odds with the tired Cheshire grins of its forebearers. I've gone back to a ton of these older stories to see if I could find another project that intrigued me as much as Green Mountain did, but ever since I was a teenager on the internet, there was always one story that always stuck out in the back of my mind. Something that genuinely made me uncomfortable and got under my skin, not something I often feel with creepypastas or internet horror stuff in general. It feels more substantial than just a creepypasta. It breaches and dwells with some very upsetting and shocking subject matter that almost no other story dares to touch, which has caused its name to be spoken in hushed whispers. Consider this your warning, and I'll only tell you once. This is Maria's Revenge, and it very well may be the darkest Sonic creepypasta I've ever read, and I'd like to share it with you. This story was uploaded on the Some Ordinary Gamers wiki on April 10th, 2013. God, I feel old. Do you know this wiki is still getting updates to this day? I have a full reading on this story both on this channel and my second channel, Hey Peter Platinum, dedicated solely to aping haunted gaming by reading creepypastas to Kevin MacLeod music from yours truly. So subscribe if you're interested in that. The author goes by Fictitious Animation, so I'll refer to him as FA. FA explains that they had recently discovered the wonderful world of emulation, and celebrated their journey into the future of retro gaming by ripping their GameCube copy of Sonic Adventure 2 Battle to the Dolphin emulator, because they're a huge Sonic fan, of course. Much like everyone else. They balance their part-time bakery job with non-stop Sonic grinding, obtaining all the emblems and Chow Garden extras and S ranks in the levels, which is impressive considering that Adventure 2's highest rank is A rank, and not S, and for a so-called mega fan of Sonic Adventure 2 to not know that is curious. Anyone who started using the internet as a kid can relate to the feeling of scouring the net for any crumb of information on their favorite video games and falling for every fake rumor possible. I spent a lot of time trying to get this white rock to summon Jirachi in Pokemon Emerald, so FA's seemingly innocuous unlockable secrets in Sonic Adventure 2 Google search is very relatable. It yielded an apparent Maria Robotnik menu theme, seemingly kept hidden from the other menu themes. Maria is a character who didn't have much screen time due to her largely being depicted through Shadow's flashbacks, so it's interesting that she would get her own dedicated theme. It required 30,000 rings, connectivity with a Game Boy Advance, and a copy of Sonic Advance 2, all things that were circumvented with Visual Boy Advance. You had to visit the Chow Garden and then the Black Market inside the kindergarten. Once all of these requirements were met, FA was delighted to find that the menu did indeed work, but it seemed kind of off. Sonic Adventure 2 has a pretty distinct art style, but the Maria theme looked kind of fuzzy, tearing the screen and looking far cruder than the other themes. She lacked a pleasant-looking model, instead recycling a weird angle from one of Shadow's cutscenes. FA was able to snag a screenshot before Dolphin abruptly crashed, forcing a reload. What happened next was not something FA, or perhaps anyone, had ever seen before. The opening cutscene had suddenly become bugged beyond all belief. Sonic and Shadow's clash on Radical Highway instead showed the same still of Maria merged into the sky, the stars passing through her model as the game chugged exponentially, unable to properly load. Shocked by what they were seeing, FA loaded up Camtasia, I haven't heard that name in years, jeez, to officially record and document what on earth had happened to their copy of Adventure 2, which is where we get all this footage from. Look at the visuals here. Is it not the least bit uncanny? The game's trying so hard to function properly, but it simply can't. Like Maria's presence is somehow causing the lag. To make matters all the more eerie, the version of Live and Learn that played sounded nothing like the upbeat version we're all used to. Eventually the game moved past the giant Maria and got stuck again on a close-up shot of Shadow, with bits and pieces of Maria raking and consuming him. The lagging did finally relent, and FA was able to load into the game, but noticed that Maria's menu theme had gone completely missing. Assuming the crash meant that the GBA connectivity trick required to unlock it hadn't been saved, they prepared to unlock it once more. They loaded back into the Chow Garden with Shadow, but a new Chow had appeared in the garden. Look at that, that's unmistakably Maria's hair. And look off to the distance, that's Maria herself. So the unlocking of a Maria menu theme had led to the game's intro and even Chow Garden being almost infected with her presence, causing all sorts of graphical bugs and oddities that FA had never seen before. Try and interpret the situation from FA's shoes. They've 100% completed this game multiple times, and not only have they discovered a secret they've never known about, it was causing a ton of incredibly visually distinct problems for the game and its emulator. Even if it was bothersome, it still felt exciting. And since they had nothing going on that day, why not explore the game to see the damage? They loaded into the game and selected Shadow's Radical Highway level. Things seemed normal at first, but during Shadow's PTSD flashback in the level's intro, a chopped up version of the scene where Maria sends Shadow out of the Ark plays, with specific voice clips repeating over and over again. All the people do it, I beg, from Maria, and simply no from Shadow. Have a listen.
All the people.
Maria! No. No.
Not even our mission objective is safe from tampering. Look at the words highlighted. When rearranged, they spell out Maria. Once you know her story, it's hard not to feel her tragic presence everywhere like a ghost haunting the narrative. But now she's literally here with us, watching our every move as her model entangles with the stars. The cutscene of Gerald's interrogation began to overlap on top of Maria, caked with multicolored filters that made the game nearly unplayable. But there's a specific object that FA points out. Maria's cropped legs, drenched in red legs. A contrast to Maria's normally sickly white complexion that conjures up a lot of uncomfortable thoughts, so keep that in the back of your mind. Somehow, FA was able to beat Radical Highway, and doing so rewarded them with a massive sequence skip, skipping past every single Team Dark level until White Jungle. For once, the cutscene's visuals seemed unscathed, but the subtitles were altered to construct a completely different scene. Gerald, all the people do it. All the scientists on the Ark. When I wake, when I sleep, they look, they do things. I don't know why it hurts. I cannot walk. I am rugged down by Gerald. No. Not a hard guess to assume this is from Maria's perspective, but what is it in this context? Maria was kept in the Ark because of her unique illness, which is totally Space AIDS in all but name, but Gunn had darker ambitions for Gerald and his creations, like Shadow, the Bio-Lizard, and the Eclipse Cannon on the Ark. The it could refer to any one of these, or perhaps some kind of treatment for her condition, but they look and they do things doesn't feel like how you'd refer to a conspiracy plot, even in fragmented sentences. It feels personal and deeply intimate. She's clearly referring to herself, giving the impression she's confessed to something with a very downcast tone. More scrambled subtitle dialogue came from Maria as the scene of her on the Ark played again, but FA noticed something within this specific still. There were inky black gaps in the stars, gaps just conveniently shaped enough to form a single word: kill. FA got to work on completing the subtitle fragments to form a complete paragraph, and what it spells out is nothing short of shockingly depraved. Gerald, all of the people do it. All the scientists on the Ark. When I wake, when I sleep, they look, they do things. I do not know why it hurts. I cannot walk. I am drugged down by Gerald. No. Let's really analyze what Maria is saying here. According to her, all of the Ark's resident scientists do it, which involves looking and doing things. Things so painful she finds it difficult to walk or move afterwards. Drugged down possibly being a very obtuse way of saying held down or drugged by something. Without so much as a notice, what Maria is complaining about has become crystal clear. The scientists aboard the Ark are taking advantage of a helpless child under their control. They're raping her. The bloody legs, it's a byproduct of the inhumane abuse she's endured on the Ark. If this vile revelation floored you, don't worry, it floored FA. They were in total shock and disbelief that such a sickening plot point would ever be considered for a Sonic game, let alone any children's game. Maria was once the bastion for innocence and infinite compassion for the human race, but this specific instance of Adventure 2 had her endure far too much, and she's become a hungry, vengeful ghost that seeks the death of all of mankind, just like Gerald Robotnik did after he learned the truth behind Maria in the original game, and just like how Shadow misinterpreted her message in the original Adventure 2. FA tried to reason how this could even be plausible. The exact stipulations of Maria's disease are ambiguous, but quarantining her on the Ark seemed to contain it somewhat. Adventure 2's story can be kind of questionable at points because of some huge jumps in logic required to make it make sense, so FA theorizes that the scientists were exposed to Maria's disease, and now that their days were numbered and they had no chance of returning to Earth, they felt nothing from holding them back. But surely Gerald wouldn't ever allow such a thing to happen, right? Well, there's a ton of ambiguity when Maria says he apparently drugs her. The grimier interpretation is that he is either complacent or even directly causing the unfathomable abuse, while the more generous interpretation is that there's some kind of treatment for her illness that requires sedation. Either option still leads to the same depraved avenue. In all of their attempts to grapple with what the game was telling them, it forced them to confront a very dark and repressed place in their own mind. A place where they could not only sympathize with Maria, but empathize. When FA was a child, they had a similar experience to Maria's. They were taken advantage of by their neighbor under the guise of playing a game of doctor that involved the use of pine needles and blackberries that lasted for days until they were found in a nearby storage building. They've since reconciled with this abuse by attending psychotherapy and having a caring support system, all things Maria did not. While FA did not fall into the same despair as she did, they totally understood their rage, their utter contempt for man, and the desire to simply wipe the slate clean, to extinguish themselves alongside the world and make it pay for what it did to her, which undoubtedly motivated FA to finish the journey. The end of White Jungle placed Super Shadow in a black void with Maria floating in front of him, with her just pleading for Shadow to end it all, to finally put a stop to this nightmare. With the press of the A button, the game crashes. Any attempts to load it back up result in a black screen simply reading, "Thank you," with no way to load the game back up properly. FA ends this tale with a bittersweet, "You're welcome," feeling both bewildered, but in a way, also satisfied. If it wasn't immediately obvious, Maria's Revenge is a pitch-black story that takes you to some exceptionally bleak places and uses that as a vehicle to spin a tale about the world of Sonic Adventure 2 somehow ending. But as I take a step back to analyze what happened, the more confused I am. My editorialization of the story kind of glosses over the weird emphasis the author had on the specific technical aspects that are brought up to the point of nauseam. Like, every time we get a screenshot, the story has to stop and mention the fact that a screenshot was taken, and if something is described that had no accompanying visual, the software just so happened to crash at that very moment. There's a ton of waffling on the Game Boy Advance connectivity, and a lot of time dedicated to using this new route of the game to try and fill in the gaps of Adventure 2's spotty narrative, with the incredibly poorly, or hilariously, worded predicate of filling in the plot holes. Well, holes were certainly filled, except they weren't, because the route is the complete opposite of the original games. Gerald wanted to take revenge on humanity partially for murdering Maria, while this version of him in the game has him really not care about that whatsoever, depending on your interpretation, so I don't see how it could fill in an objective plot hole. Maria, despite her situation, was the most optimistic and hopeful character in the story, believing that Shadow could help humanity to her last dying breath. But this version portrays a depiction of Maria so broken that she wants to wipe every soul off the face of the earth, leaving existence suspended in a black void forever. How exactly she was capable of warping reality in the first place is left up to interpretation, I guess? Nowhere is that explained, which is odd considering how methodical every other explanation is. The story is competently written from a technical standpoint. There are definitive paragraphs and chapter divisions, and the grammar makes sense. We've even got some symbolism that makes sense. This might not seem very impressive, but believe me, the bar is so incredibly low, not just for creepypastas, but Sonic creepypastas especially. We're used to so much worse. All of this happened from our narrator discovering a hidden theme for the game that unlocks this nearly broken route off of his ripped ISO. But they're seemingly the only person to ever experience this. Other people are said to be aware of the theme since they found it from a Google search, but Maria's revenge only happens to our author, which means they're implied to be the only person to ever discover this super secret route that Sega programmed into their game, which was compared to the planned Genocide City level in the design documents of Sonic 2 as a little oopsie left in there. With a fanbase as dedicated and fiery as the Sonic fanbase, I honestly just can't believe that not only would this not be found in the first place by someone else, but that no one else would document these occurrences. And as you might have expected, the believability of these events is the main point of contention I have for the story. But most people take more umbrage with its plot beats. I applaud the story for having so much visual evidence for the unusual occurrences. Multiple screenshots and even video footage of the story's passages do a tremendous job to bring it to life. A ton of the footage is genuinely uncanny. So many in-game assets are outright broken and create some genuinely powerful compositions with incredibly substantial symbolism. While there is that part where a very blatant MMD model of Gerald kept showing up that really stomped all over my immersion, probably should have just not included that because it looks ridiculous. Also, the chow with Maria's hair was kind of funny. But I'm beating around the bush. The elephant in the room has been here from the moment the video started, and it's the story's most infamous aspect, Maria's abuse. What's described completely shatters most readers' immersions. That anyone in Sonic Team would willingly draft or even suggest such a vile treatment for this character has people up in arms, proclaiming the story to be edgy or shock jock garbage and not worth read because of it, with some becoming extremely offended over what they felt as tasteless depiction. But I'm somewhere in the middle. In no way do I feel like Maria's abuse was simply thrown in for shock factor, because there's a lengthy paragraph from the author detailing their own similar abuse to empathize with the character. Had this just been a shock factor inclusion, why include such an intimate detail from the narrator? Clearly the author has thought about this element with some degree of serious consideration, but I can't ignore the fact that this is a Sonic the Hedgehog story in which a child is actively being groomed, which is a plot point to motivate a character. I have no doubt in my mind this wasn't intended to come off as tone-deaf or offensive, but it does kind of feel disproportional. I mean, she was murdered in the game proper, but the game's age rating means something. People have way different standards and reactions to sexual crimes. It was a step too far for a lot of people. It's just a bit weird that such a topic is interspersed with, gosh, Camtasia simply isn't working right now. So now that we've disassembled the story to its core parts, what are we left with? An incredibly confusing story about FA discovering a secret route in Sonic Adventure 2 that's somehow meant to fill the plot holes of the story, despite directly contradicting it, in that the story is about Maria Robotnik being groomed and assaulted, possibly by her own family on the Ark where she's dying of space AIDS, and then deciding to destroy the world through unexplained reality warping powers. I never thought I'd describe a Sonic story as Lynchian, but I defy you to say it isn't. I'm hesitant to say that the story just doesn't make sense at all because of the weird leaps in logic. It sort of does, just not in a way people conventionally understand. It's soberingly surreal in a very uncomfortable and oddly realistic way, no doubt because that FA wholeheartedly believed in themselves and their story. All the effort put into the visuals and the hyper-specific depictions clearly portray someone who put their heart into this tale. It's just that the results are confusing. It's undoubtedly a piece of outsider art, like reading a diary entry turned into a narrative, and that might just be what's going on. Because FA has an account on the wiki I read the story from, and their account description is a lot. I have some strange life experiences. I was secluded in my house for 2 years with constant supervision. I was molested by my neighbor as a child. I was a cutter. And there are even more personal things about me that I'm sure will sneak their way into my creepypastas. When I write a pasta, it's based on my true life experience, usually only to a small degree though. This is what gives my pastas that extra air of realism and personality. I've learned that I am most creative when I'm in a dark place. And I like inflation, according to one of my posts. Okay. So, that was certainly a biography, alright? I reread it again and again to make sure I was seeing things correctly, but it's beyond a shadow of a doubt now. Fictitious Animation wrote Maria's Revenge from part of their real-life experiences, which is heartbreaking to hear, but utterly fascinating at the same time. I want to explore this user some more through their linked accounts they've provided. Not the inflation part, I think I'll skip that. Trying to psychoanalyze them through their internet activity is going to help us gain a tremendous understanding of what the story is truly trying to say, because despite all the terror, there's a real beating heart of sincerity that I've yet to see from almost any other creepypasta present in FA's work.
You get absorbed in this illusory world, and we like it. But you'll like the present moment even more because, just like with creating your own reality, it's even easier than creating your own reality once you're in the present moment.
Who exactly is Fictitious Animation, or Jacob as they went by? Exploring their YouTube channel reveals that they have a bevy of uploads ranging from Gary's Mod to esotericism and conspiracy theories. I think it's fair to assume that FA was extremely young when writing Maria's Revenge, which makes their personal recounting that much more heartbreaking. Exploring their fandom account reveals that Maria's Revenge isn't the only story they've written. They wrote another story called Adventures of a Single Parent, involving a father and daughter moving into a new house. The father buys her a Nintendo DS that comes with a mysterious bootleg game that not only becomes her new obsession, but begins to alter her behavior and reality itself by giving her unnatural abilities and having some sort of probability manipulation, as in being able to predict something that would normally seem improbable with flawless accuracy. It's really hard to explain, you might have to read the story yourself. The story completely changes perspectives from the daughter to the father over and over without so much as a warning, but there's a clear and present theme of child exploitation through media here, which is much more of a focus in another story they've written, Talking Angela. Does anyone remember those rumors back in 2014 where those talking animal apps were allegedly connected to a trafficking ring? I don't think that ever ended up being true, but the idea of these seemingly child-friendly apps allowing predators to prey on children was partly blown up because of this story. It's arguably more famous than Maria's Revenge. Just look at these screenshots, they speak for themselves. The theme of childhood grooming and abuse is all over FA's work, but the abuse is often featured, if not directly connected to children's media like Talking Angela and Sonic the Hedgehog. Sometimes symbolically through the characters, other times being methods of communication by predators. Visiting their DeviantArt account, we can see they belong to various fan bases like My Little Pony and Steven Universe. So FA was clearly interested in a lot of these properties that would later become the catalyst for shocking tales of child grooming later on. Remember what they willingly revealed in their fandom bio. Knowing this, the beating heart of their stories becomes a lot more understandable. Fictitious Animations uses these topics as a way to cope with their own abuse. That much was obvious in Maria's Revenge. FA inserts themselves into these stories as their narrator and shares his own personal anecdotes to empathize with the fictional characters. There's that fiction-reality theme again. Maria's Revenge is without a doubt the most shocking of the three I found, but all of them feel incredibly similar and have nearly identical core premises. A child, either in the narrative or experiencing it as the narrator, is implicitly or actively being abused or manipulated, and they find some kind of companionship with fiction. The daughter in the DS story gets obsessed with that bootleg video game. FA becomes obsessed with researching the Talking Angela rumors, and of course, he finds some limited kinship with Maria Robotnik. FA's work is incredibly dreamlike and surreal in a very haunting way. Things don't always make sense, character motivations are questionable, and they can be difficult to follow. Some information is actively contradicted within the game itself, but I struggle to find comparisons to any other piece of literature out there. These stories are completely original, they don't feel like anything else. Maria's Revenge's visuals are ripped and edited together by FA themselves using Blender and 3D Ripper DX. All of those visuals you saw were actually happening, which is unfathomably impressive and dedicated for a story of this caliber. These are very flawed stories, but even past some of the confusing narratives and perspective swaps, people just refuse to engage with Maria's Revenge as to what it actually is. A coping mechanism written from a young abuse survivor. However, during the making of this video, I received a message from a very dedicated user named Caddy on Twitter who presented me with some extremely troubling news that forced me to entirely rewrite the section of the script. Originally, I was going to speculate on the whereabouts of Fictitious Animation and how the public consume their work, but something far more pressing has come to my attention. Going through the comments on their most popular video, one of them from 7 years ago carries a ton of weight to it. Hello, I'm sorry, but we will no longer be releasing videos. My brother passed away last year. The implication is obvious, but how can we know for sure that Bob Ashbourne is being truthful? Well, that account is credited as a voice featured in the video, as well as in their gaming clan Blue Light tab on their channel, so FA clearly knew this individual. The Blue Light clan also has a Steam group of the same name where we can find an account sharing FA's YouTube profile. It hasn't been online for over 1,000 days, with several memorial posts under it. What especially broke my heart was reading one of their last DeviantArt posts, a manifesto called God Amongst Animals, that details their abuse, descent into drugs like LSD and DMT, and rising fascination with the nature of human consciousness and divinity. It borders on a rant more than anything else, and when I look back at their channel, their topics become a lot more concerning, knowing that their mental state was in such disarray. I can't absolutely confirm anything for certain, but it's looking more than likely that FA is no longer with us. Maria's Revenge has become a far more upsetting read knowing the context, even more so the reactions to it. Of course, not everyone is aware of the situation or even read the story. People mostly know this tale from Maria's abuse and simply run with it. But in good consciousness, I can't let reviews like this become the prevailing thought, that FA was somehow sick in the head or a predator for using these topics when there's so much contrary evidence otherwise. I don't really want to speak for them, especially not now since they seem to no longer be with us, nor am I going to say that everyone who read the story and disliked it is reacting like this, because obviously they aren't, but there's a catastrophic lack of optics and research going on surrounding the story in favor for digestible reactions. Of course, this story should be able to stand on its own as a piece of fiction, but that's the issue. It doesn't. It's very clumsy and hard to follow, and is certainly worthy of scrutiny and criticism, but a lot of people are completely ignorant to the situation, and their ignorance comes off as especially distasteful. Again, not a lot of people are aware of the situation, and you shouldn't have to sleuth around the internet to gather context clues for a singular story for it to be considered good, or even that my interpretation of the text is unquestionable and objectively correct, but attaching a reaction image to reading the story makes me question if the people doing so are built for reading stories like this, because they might be more suited to topics like Siren Head, seems a little bit more their speed. But despite all the doom and gloom, there may be something of a silver lining. FA wrote these stories with intentions to heal, and since people are still talking about them to this day, their story and struggles haven't been forgotten. If anything, they're being remembered more than ever because of a recent resurgence Maria's Revenge has gotten around the time of me writing this script. I still believe that despite the greater context, Maria's Revenge is allowed to be criticized and disliked because it is a piece of fiction on the internet at the end of the day. It's just that some of the optics around it are really poor, and not everyone is willing or capable to think a little bit more critically about it. Out of respect, I haven't contacted anyone in FA's life, and if you have half a mind, I suggest you shouldn't either. I hope that if nothing else, I've at least spread some awareness on the situation, and I hope that people can recognize the situation a bit more. I know a lot of people in that specific scene are young and impressionable, so I think getting too upset at someone for leaving a fiery review is a dumb idea. But consider it along the lines of No Longer Human by Osamu Dazai, a deeply personal work written by someone who eventually lost their personal battles. It doesn't feel appropriate to end this sobering tale like I usually end my videos, but I just hope that everyone is doing alright. FA is with the Lord now.